Hello everyone and welcome to Paperback Journeys, where today we're going to be talking about the 11 books that I read in the month of April. 11 books! Which book was my favourite, which book was my least favourite, and then we'll update the top 10 list of the year to see if any of this month's reading has made the list. If you'd like to keep up to date with my top 10 list throughout the year, then please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell for updates. Also, at the end of this video, I'm going to be giving a prize to the person who came closest to guessing what my book ratings for the month were going to be. I'll do that at the end of the video. So first of all, let me tell you about the first book that I read in April. And actually, I don't have a physical copy of this book. And that was The Death of Ivan Ilich by Leo Tolstoy. That's difficult for me to say. Too many vowels. So The Death of Ivan Ilich by Leo Tolstoy is a novella about a man who, you know, on the surface, he seems to have everything. He has high status in society, he's got a good job, he's got a beautiful family, but then he gets sick and he starts to believe that he is going to die, even though everyone around him seems to sort of deny this fact, or they just don't really want to face up to it. They'd rather ignore it. And as his illness gets worse, he begins to think back on his life and the choices that he made and what he dedicated his time to. And he questions whether he was ever truly happy or if he was just going about life ticking off boxes. Do you know what I mean? The things that were expected of him, the milestones that he thought he had to reach. I really enjoyed this book. I think it goes deep into the idea of mortality and how, even though we all know that we're going to die one day, it still sort of feels impossible to imagine it actually happening, you know, to us individually. Like, yeah, everyone else is going to die, but me, really, me. I'm going to die. Nah, can't be me. And, you know, so so Ivan is kind of going through that feeling, you know? And for me, it sort of served as a reminder that we're only going to be here for a short time in the grand scheme of things. And we may as well, whatever age we are, however long we've got left, we may as well make the most of the time that we have. I think it's just so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day routines, you know? Obviously, they're necessary. You've got to drive into work every day. You've got to do the commute. You've got to do your 8 hours, and then you've got to drive home, and you've got to feed the dogs and feed the kids. You have to do these things. They are absolutely necessary. But sometimes I think that we mistake these sort of routines and habits for the reason that we're alive. We kind of get hypnotized by tasks and routines, and we forget that one day we are going to have to look back on our life, and hopefully we're going to be able to say, do you know what, I lived well, you know, I really enjoyed myself. I did the things that I feel like I was supposed to do. I think some people, when they read this book, they might see it as a bit dark and depressing, but for me, it was more like a wake-up call. Because when you reach the last page, you look up and you kind of go, "Oh yeah, I'm still here." You're reminded that you've still got time, and for me, it just made me grateful, and I felt like it was quite I don't know, an inspiring book. Can I call it that? I don't know. Maybe. The next book that I read was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norl by Susanna Clarke. So I wasn't really sure what to expect when reading this book. Although it is critically acclaimed, there were a lot of people who told me that it is a little bit dry. It's quite wordy. The story is set in the 19th century England during the Napoleonic Wars, and it follows two magicians. At the start of the book, magic has mostly become just a theoretical subject. It's something that the social elites debate on in drawing rooms. It's not really something that anyone actually uses. But now that England is at war with France, the government wants to use practical magic as a way to gain a strategic advantage. Two main characters in the book are very different. You've got Mr. Norl, who is quiet and he's reserved, a bit bookish, and he wants to make practical magic respectable. And then you've got Jonathan Strange, who is bold and curious, and he wants to push magic to its limits, to see how far it can go, how powerful it can really be in real world application. But through that comes risks. What I really liked about this book is its rich and historical setting. It sort of blends fantasy with real historical events and figures. I think it does that really well. Also, Susanna Clarke writes the book in a style that fits the time period. So what I mean by that is the book is written in the kind of prose that you would expect from a 19th century book. It feels as though you're reading a Charles Dickens novel rather than something that was written in this era. And you know, there's like I say, the prose is sort of ornate in a way. Is that the right way to describe it? Yeah, maybe. We'll just go with that. It sounds good. There's also a lot of footnotes that are included in the text. I have sort of mixed feelings about the footnotes. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that kind of the style in which she writes the book, I think, adds to the authenticity and the charm of the book, which are two things which I think the book is heavily reliant upon. There's lots of really interesting side characters. The world feels genuinely immersive. I think a lot of people, some people would read this book and it just wouldn't be for them. You know, the pacing is very slow. It's not really plot driven. Me, I personally liked the prose, but I think that others might find it quite dense. And when you consider that it's just over 1,000 pages long, I think it's a bit of a mountain to climb if you're not enjoying yourself. As far as the footnotes go, I started off liking the footnotes, but by the end, I didn't love them, you know? I was kind of like skimming over, getting the general idea of what the footnotes were saying, and then I was moving on. Overall, I'll say that I did enjoy it. I liked it. It's probably not going to make the top 10 list, but it's close. The next book that I read was The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie. I sort of had mixed feelings when I was reading this book because on one hand, I just wanted to gobble it up. You know what I mean? I just wanted to get to the end, find out what happened. But at the same time, I didn't want it to end. So if you've been watching this channel for any amount of time, you'll know how I feel about Joe Abercrombie. I'm just a massive fan. He's one of my favorite living authors. The Wisdom of Crowds is the last book in Joe Abercrombie's The Age of Madness trilogy. I'm not going to give any spoilers because, like I said, you know, it's the end of a series, but I'll just say that it's set in a fantasy world that is changing very rapidly. Industry is rising, old systems of government are breaking down, and rebellion feels like it's always like simmering or, you know, just about to bubble over. This book follows several characters on different sides of a resistance as they try and survive and adapt and take control of what's happening around them. I was a massive fan of the First Lord trilogy, but overall, I would say that The Age of Madness, which is set in the same world as the First Law, is probably better. I think the characters are just as good, but this trilogy had more of a solid plot than the original trilogy. There's more political scheming in the cities, and although I really liked the battle scenes in the First Law, I think the battle scenes are better in The Age of Madness. That's one thing that he does really well. Like when Joe Abercrombie is writing a battle scene, just in case you haven't read Abercrombie before, what he does really well is kind of like transition between a lot of different perspectives in the battle. Not all of them will be main characters. Some of them would be characters that we're just introduced to, and then all of a sudden you're just kind of meeting them as they're under attack, and they're trying to react to the chaos and the violence all around them. And some of the times, you know, they meet a bloody end, and we get to see what that feels like from someone that is in the midst of the heat of battle. And then suddenly, you know, if that person dies, then we're moving to another character. We're moving to another character. And it's just bouncing around this chaotic battlefield. It's really intense and kind of cinematic, I think, the way that he writes battle scenes. Thematically, I think this trilogy is superior to the First Lord trilogy. The book, I think, has something to say about the working class and how it has to constantly fight against the powers that want to rule over it, and so that they can kind of enrich themselves. It shows how difficult that fight to escape from getting the boot off of your neck can be, because as soon as any progress is made, these little vacuums are created where opportunists are trying to jump in to become the new rulers, to enrich themselves and make themselves famous. And they end up hijacking and bastardizing a political movement for their own gain. If you enjoy fantasy and haven't read Joe Abercrombie, I definitely suggest giving him a shot. The first trilogy is definitely more character driven, especially The Blade itself, which is all about exploring the personalities and the characters, and it's just got it's not got very much plot, the first book, but if you enjoy that kind of thing, well-developed characters, dark humor, no clear heroes or villains, then I really think that you're going to enjoy Abercrombie's style. The next book that I read was The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. So this is the book that the PBJ Book Club chose for April for us all to read together. There seems to be a certain kind of book that the club gravitates towards, which is dark and dismal, and I really like that about them. In The Last House on Needless Street, there are really two stories that are being told. You've got, on one hand, a psychological horror about a man named Ted who lives in this sort of boarded up house with his daughter and his cat. And then meanwhile, we follow Dee, who is a woman that is searching for her sister who went missing when they were young. She doesn't know if her sister is alive or dead, but she's dedicated her whole life to finding her. As is often the case, this book divided the reading group and sparked some, I think, really interesting discussion. I personally fell on the side of enjoying it. Though I can see some of the book's imperfections. What I really liked about the book was the atmospheric setting. There's also a lot of ambiguity, and as I read it, I often felt like I was trying to make out something through the fog, you know? It was unclear, it was eerie, it was constantly shifting. It's really clear from early on in the book that Ted is an unusual man, but the book takes its time in explaining everything kind of like a spiral, you know? You're always just trying to get closer to the center. Sometimes, for some people, it took a bit too long to spiral, you know? Because of that reason, because of its ambiguity and its mystery in trying to figure out exactly what was going on, I'm not sure that this book is the best fit for a book club when you're reading weekly sections, because what was happening is that we'd all get together on a Friday, like we always do with the book club, and everyone was kind of sharing their theories of what was happening, and some people guessed really early on what was going on, and so it kind of broke the illusion. I think this book would be better as a book to, I think this book will be better as a book. Yeah, great commentary. No, I think this book would be better to read quickly over a weekend where you can stay immersed in the mystery and build up the momentum. You know, maybe finish it over a couple of days. It's not a very long book, you know, it's sort of like mid-length, I would say. Yeah, most people, I think, will be able to read this in a weekend or at most a week. You could get it done pretty quickly. Yeah, I think that's the best way to read it, just quickly and uninterrupted. I really liked how original the book felt. I've read a few things like this before, but not that often. There's an engaging mystery at the heart of it. I think that your enjoyment will really depend on how quickly you figure out what's going on. And if you work it out early, the reveal might lose some of its punch. It's going to be a bit like seeing a magician, but already knowing how the trick is done. You know, it's just not quite as fun. Also, if you prefer straightforward timelines and clear storytelling, then this book definitely wouldn't be for you. Some people in the group didn't like it. Most did, though. I sound like I'm talking this book down. Most people liked it. I think most people gave it 4 stars. I gave it 3.5 stars, I think. So yeah, you can round it up to a 4 if you want, if you're feeling generous. I think it was nice. It was creepy. I enjoyed it. So they're the first few books that I read. And then I did something a little bit special because I took a week off of work. This is something that I booked off, a little bit of a staycation. And I, during that week, read a collection of Stephen King books. I'm actually going to be releasing a video where I attempt to read 7 Stephen King books in 7 days. I'm not going to tell you whether or not I succeeded within the 7 days or not, but yeah, I'll be releasing that video probably in a week or 2. The first book that I read from Stephen King was Apt Pupil. Little picture there of Elon Musk doing a Roman salute. So this book was a punch in the gut. It's a psychological thriller that was part of Stephen King's 1982 collection, Different Seasons. The main character is a young lad named Todd Bowden. He is a seemingly exemplary American boy who finds out that his neighbor worked in the camps during World War II. And instead of turning him in or telling his parents or anyone about it, Todd becomes fascinated by the stories that this old man tells. Stories that are completely gruesome, as you'd imagine, from one of the darkest periods in human history. And the two of them develop a really messed up relationship as they begin to further poison and corrupt one another's minds and actions. It's pretty rare that I read a book where all of the POV characters are evil. I'm trying to think. I think it's hard to write a story like that where you don't really like anyone, but it's still interesting, you know? Usually I need to root for someone, at least one person. I want to be rooting for them. But in this case, I was praying for both of their downfalls. It's a fairly short book. It's a little novella, but it still manages, I think, to pack a lot of character development. There's loads of tension. There's a lot of suspense. It's just constantly rising and rising. Yeah, this book was really a lot. This is also one of those rare Stephen King books without any supernatural elements, and yet it still ends up being one of his most unsettling books. There's something about the realism that makes it even more disturbing, I think. You're definitely going to want to avoid this book if you just don't like graphic content. Especially content that touches on real historical events. The Holocaust is discussed quite a bit, and it's not sugar-coated or glossed over in any way. You kind of dig into it. Also, you're probably not going to relate to the characters in this story, hopefully. And it's, so if that's something that is important to your reading experience, then this isn't going to be the book for you either. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great book, even though I hated the characters and it was turning my stomach. I couldn't stop turning the pages. The tension, again, it just kept building and building. The ending was great. It was just, yeah. I'm not saying it was a happy ending. I'm not saying it was a depressing ending. I'm not giving any spoilers. I just think it was fitting. It was fitting. It was apt. The next book that I read was Duma Key. And this is one that I was really excited about because a lot of people had recommended it to me. It's another psychological horror that follows Edgar, who is a successful construction company CEO from Minnesota. And he suffers this really bad accident that results in the loss of his right arm. And he gets severe head injuries that he has to sort of get on the road to recovery for. And as part of his recovery, he moves to a remote island called Duma Key off the Gulf of Mexico in Florida. And during his time there, he discovers that he has a talent for painting, but it sort of soon becomes clear that his artwork is revealing unsettling truths that may be tied to some kind of supernatural power. One of the things that I really liked about this book is that while a lot of Stephen King stories are set in Maine or a lot of the northern states, it was fun for me to see him write something that was set in the Sunshine State. The change of setting, I think, gave the book a really different vibe, and it was eerie in a different kind of way. And I appreciated that. Another thing that I enjoy about King's work is how a lot of his supernatural elements often cross over with his other books. So in this book, there is a connection to The Dark Tower. The idea of magical paintings also reminded me of Rose Madder. And also his short story, The Road Virus Heads North, both of which involve art with otherworldly powers. I think it makes all of these stories feel like they're part of the same universe, and so I love that. With that said though, this is one of those books where I actually found the side characters to be a bit more interesting than the main character. I didn't really find Edgar to be all that interesting. The book starts off really strong, but the deeper I got into it, unfortunately, the more it started to drag. And this was the longest Stephen King book that I read this month. It's around 600 pages. It's definitely on the longer side. Honestly, I feel like it didn't need to be that long. I feel like this book could have worked well as a novella. Like Apt Pupil. You could have got this done in 150, 200 pages. And I just feel like it would have been more interesting. It would have kept my attention a bit more. It's just a bit of a baggy middle. I'd say this section, bit baggy. The next book I read was Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. So I should probably mention that Shawshank Redemption is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I know that doesn't make me very original. It's probably in most people's top 10. I always hear about people talking about Shawshank Redemption is my favorite movie. But yeah, I think there's a good reason for that. It's brilliant. Usually when a movie is based on a book, the book ends up being better. Occasionally, very rarely, the movie is better. But this might be the first time that I can honestly say that the movie and the book are about as good as one another. In case you haven't seen the movie or read the novella, the story follows a prisoner named Andy. He is a banker who's been convicted of murdering his wife and her lover. He's sentenced to life imprisonment in Shawshank State Prison, where he befriends another inmate named Red. And Red is actually the narrator of this story. So everything is told from his perspective. And he watches as Andy kind of endures these horrific things inside the prison, but continues to prove his innocence and hold on to his dignity and quietly hope for freedom somehow against the odds. He's just holding on to one day he wants to be free. I really enjoyed this one. It's very dark in places, but it still manages to feel inspiring. I love the friendship between Andy and Red and how they manage to hold on to something good and human in such a hopeless place. There's a lot of joy, I think, to be found in these little small moments of connection between the characters. I just really liked that. I love it when people are still able to keep up their spirit, even though they're constantly hit by wave after wave of darkness. There's a lot of antagonists for the reader to absolutely despise, and that's always a good thing. And honestly, that only made me love the protagonists more. It's so satisfying when you have pure evil rooting against someone and they still find a way to rise above it. It's been a while since I watched the movie, and even though I loved it when I saw it, I feel like enough time has passed that I could really sink my teeth into this and relive the story again. It didn't take anything away from the book, knowing everything that happens. If anything, it added to it. I loved it. The next book that I read was Dolores Claybornne. This book was recommended to me by a couple of people and didn't love it. Didn't hate it. I thought it was okay. The story is told from the perspective of the titular character, Dolores Claybornne, and it's presented as one continuous monologue. And that's probably one of my favorite things about it, honestly. I really enjoy the way that Dolores speaks. One thing that I think Stephen King does consistently well is dialogue. And then this is just pure dialogue from one single character. Dolores is a 65-year-old widow who's being questioned by the police about the death of her employer. And from basically the very first page, she says, listen, I didn't kill my employer, but I did, as many of you suspect, kill my husband. So it's kind of like I shot the sheriff, but I didn't shoot the deputy situation. The book is Dolores recounting her life, especially her struggles with domestic abuse and her complicated relationship with her employer. Those were probably the scenes that I enjoyed the most. I really liked Dolores as a character. She's a strong female protagonist. I found her voice to be really compelling, but I think that I pretty much loved the first half of the book, but then the slow pacing started to catch up with me, a little bit like Duma Key in that way. And I found myself looking forward to the conclusion of the book. There's a little hint of the supernatural here, but it's very light. One of the more interesting things about the book is that it takes place during the same solar eclipse as Gerald's game. So I liked that. I liked the idea that these two stories were happening at the same time in the same world, and it gave the whole thing an added layer of connection. But yeah, it wasn't my favorite Stephen King book. It definitely wasn't my least favorite Stephen King book. That was probably The Regulators, as you know. I hated The Regulators. Sorry, The Regulators, just catching strays there. I just wanted to remind you all, I hate The Regulators. The next book that I read was The Dead Zone, and this is a psychological political thriller. The main character is Johnny Smith, and he's a school teacher who wakes up from a 5-year coma with the ability to see into people's past and future just by touching them. The book has a great antagonist, but the thing is, he doesn't feel really present until the second half of the book. He is introduced right at the beginning, and we get little moments with him kind of like sprinkled in here and there, but it's only later that he really starts to become central to the plot. Unlike Duma Key and unlike Dolores Claybornne, I actually preferred the second half of the plot to the first. I did like the early part where we see Johnny living his life, and it felt like kind of nostalgic and a little bit romantic in tone. But the middle section didn't quite land for me, but the ending I thought was excellent. And so, yeah, it bookended it a little bit. You know, I love the beginning, I love the ending. The middle, I didn't quite connect with, but yeah, the ending was just so good that it saved it. It saved the whole thing. Overall, I did like this one. The next book that I read was The Jaunt, and that is in the Skeleton Crew collection of short stories. This was definitely the shortest story that I read this month from Stephen King. Stephen King is obviously known predominantly as a horror writer, but I think he is an excellent sci-fi writer as well. I went into The Jaunt totally cold. The only thing that I knew about it was that it was one of his darkest pieces of fiction, according to a lot of his fans. So I was just really happy to find out that this was going to be a sci-fi. It takes place in the 24th century, where science has advanced to the point where teleportation is now a very common method of travel. And it's even allowed us to explore space because what we can do is we can teleport teleportation devices through other teleportation devices. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like we're skipping a stone across a lake, and it means that we can cover now huge distances really quickly. The story is told from the perspective of a father who is about to travel with his family to Mars using this technology. And while they wait for the teleportation to begin, the family starts asking questions of the father about how this technology works and the history of it being developed. So the father explains the development of the technology as a way of sort of calming everyone down before their first trip. I really liked the concept and the whole idea of teleportation. It honestly did feel like I was reading Philip K. Dick. It's just a perfect blend of science fiction and terror. It's short, it's impactful. It only took me about an hour to read, and the ending was just great. It was great. It might be one of my favorite short stories. In fact, I think I can say that quite confidently, that it's one of my favorite short stories of all time. The next book that I read, there's a lot of books. The next book that I read was The Long Walk, obviously another Stephen King, and this is a dystopian novel written under the pseudonym of Richard Bachman. It's set in an alternate authoritarian version of the United States, and the story centers around this brutal annual event called the Long Walk. The premise is really simple, but it's horrific. You've got 100 teenage boys that have to continuously walk at a minimum pace of 4 miles per hour without resting. And if they fall below that speed, they're given 3 warnings, and then after the 3rd warning, they're taken out by these soldiers that are riding in jeeps alongside them. And the game or the event is basically last man standing or last boy standing. The story is told from the perspective of one of the contestants. It's a 16-year-old boy named Ray Garrity. And yeah, I mean, this book is pretty horrific. At first, the walk seems manageable, but as time starts to drag on, the hours start to tick by, the hours turn into days, and it becomes absolutely, as you can probably imagine, brutal, both physically and mentally, as they just have to keep going. And the longer it goes on, the more you start to see the toll that it takes on each of them. As the walk continues, all of the boys are obviously talking to one another, jovially at first, and then as a way to just keep their mind focused. And we gradually learn more about their backgrounds and their personalities. I'll say one complaint that I have about this book is that the world outside of the Long Walk is left very ambiguous. I know that this is something that a lot of people are going to like about it. I still can't decide whether it's something which would have enhanced the book if I just knew why this event was happening. I don't know. Or is it more ominous if I don't know why this is happening? But Yeah, I think I need to let that thought cook a little bit before settling on a firm opinion. On one hand, it is interesting that the focus is entirely on the walk. It's kind of like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery in that way, where the horror is just concentrated in one disturbing event, and we don't quite learn what's going on outside beyond the walk. This is another example of Stephen King absolutely sticking the landing. The ending was excellent. And that said, you know, I do feel like this is another full-length novel which could have worked as a novella. I know it seems like I only like his novellas, because that's pretty much what I've said every book. That's not true. Like I said, my favorite Stephen King book is 11/22/63. It's one of his longest books. I love The Stand. I love It. You know, I like his big, chunky books. Just with these books, a lot of them felt like, I don't know, they felt a little bit stretched out. But then again, specifically with The Long Walk, I mean, it's got long in the title, right? So maybe that's the point. Maybe it needs to feel long and repetitive for you to feel the same dread and the same exhaustion as the boys. The fact that it sort of feels never ending might be part of what makes it work. Yeah, maybe. This is definitely one of the books that I enjoyed. And actually, there is a movie adaptation that's coming out, I think in September of this year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how they handle that one on the screen. But anyway, let's talk about the worst book of the month. Unfortunately, that is probably going to have to be... It's going to have to be Dolores Claybornne, I'm afraid. It just felt like the middle of it sort of dragged. It was a bit too long. I liked the character. I loved the monologue, definitely, but I just needed it to tighten up a little bit. But what was my favorite book of the month? There were definitely a few contenders, almost too many to name, really, but I really liked The Death of Ivan Ilich, just like a powerful reflection on mortality and how easy it is to drift through life without really living. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norl also stood out, really rich and atmospheric. Incredible attention to detail, which I liked. Felt like stepping into a real slice of 19th century England. I loved it. Apt Pupil, deeply unsettling and gripping. The Jaunt, one of my favorite short stories of all time. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I'm juggling a lot of these books here, but in the end, my book of the month has to go to, maybe it feels inevitable that it will go to, The Wisdom of Crowds. The political tension, the way it wrapped up the trilogy really well, the complex characters, it all just worked for me. It had emotional weight, incredible pacing. I'm so happy that Joe Abercrombie was able to give a solid ending to just a brilliant series. I loved it. I can't wait to read The Devils. The Devils is coming out next month. It's coming out in May. So, you know, perfect timing. Now, here's the big question. Do any of these books make it onto my top 10 reads of 2025? Just before I update the top 10 list, I'd like to thank my Patreon members for supporting the channel. A big thank you to the cult members. A massive thank you to the named men. And an extra special thank you to the quartet. In every video, I like to give a member of the quartet a random compliment. And so today, I'd like to tell Valerie Jones. Valerie, come over here. I've got something to tell you. Valerie, talking to you feels like opening the window to the first warm day of spring. Everything instantly feels lighter and better for having you around. You bring this natural, effortless warmth that makes people around you feel like good things are just around the corner. If you'd like to support this channel and get some perks, for example, this Metallic Paperback Journeys exclusive book clip, and also become a member of the book club where we all read along together, all that kind of stuff, then you can find the link in the description box below. Okay, so let's bring down the leaderboard and take a look at the current top 10. So currently as it stands, before we add this month's books, we have got in number 10, Shuggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. Then we've got An Honest Thief by Fyodor Dostoevsky, Horns by Joe Hill, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, Small Gods by Terry Pratchett, Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, Exhalation by Ted Chiang, The Heart in Winter by Kevin Barry, Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, and The Age of Madness trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I've got the whole trilogy at the top because, you know, I don't want to have Joe Abercrombie like all the way through the top 10, you know? It's just, that wouldn't be that cool. I can tell you that this month I am going to add 3 books to the top 10 list. One of them is in the Age of Madness trilogy. And so, unfortunately, that does mean that we're going to lose 2 books from the top 10 list. It's time to load up the book cannon. All right, now it's time to give out an Amazon voucher to someone who played the rating game and came closest to guessing what I would rate the books that I would read for April. And the winner is... from the United Kingdom, Paul Mitchell. So if you're from the United Kingdom and your name is Paul Mitchell, then you're going to receive an Amazon voucher in your email, and I hope you buy a book with it. If you think you can guess what I'll be rating the books that I read next month, then you can find the details on the Paperback Journeys Discord. And so that was the month of April, and now we move into May. May is the month that I turn 40 years old, and I'm not happy about it. Actually, I don't think I care. I don't think I care. Look, at the end of the day, this is a fact. I'm in my 30s, right? Today, I'm in my 30s, man. Fact, yeah? I'm fine. Anyway, why am I holding up this wheel? So, as always, I'm going to spin this wheel to find out what I'm going to be reading in the coming month. And if you'd like to see me spin this wheel to find out what I'll be reading in May, then you can click on this video up here. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And as always, happy reading. 40 years old. What a load of old shit.